Okay, we're on the third of our 3 videos for this unit, and we'll pick up right where we left off. Another of the things that operating systems provide is hardware device management. Now, there's literally thousands of different printers and scanners and cameras, display screens and joysticks and microphones and all sorts of peripherals, each of which works a bit differently. Now, you remember when we talked about the hardware, that for the CPU to talk to an input or an output device, it sends certain bytes of code to them. Well, they don't all react to the same bytes. So authors of application programs couldn't possibly address all the differences among the various peripherals. Just think if you were writing Microsoft Word and you had to figure out every single possible printer that somebody could use and change your program to be able to send the right stuff to that printer, not just for all the thousands of printers already on the market, but for the thousands more that will be on the market over the next few years that people might be using your software. So, what does an operating system do? There's something called a device driver. It's part of system software that gets installed into the operating system. Operating systems standardize the interface with classes of peripherals. So here's an example for printers, but you could think of this example working for cameras or for scanners or for any other type of peripheral. Okay, what's one of the things that people might want to do with a printer? There might be a display options dialog. You know, when you press the print key in Word or Excel or OneNote or your internet browser or whatever, you can get a dialog up there that allows you to change printers or make it portrait mode instead of landscape mode, or make it double-sided instead of single-sided, and so on. So there's something. Every printer needs to be able to print a page. You need to be able, if you're a program, you need to be able to tell if the printer is online so that you can pop up a message that says, I'm sorry, the printer you selected isn't online. Either, go press the on button or select a different printer. Maybe display the toner levels and so on. There's all sorts of things that every printer needs to be able to do. Now, they'll all do it differently, but they all need to do these things. So what's a device driver? The operating system creates an applications programming interface, or API, for each type of device. And the API consists of all the functions that a device of that type must perform, along with a definition of the form of data that will be passed to or from the device. So, if you're the application program and you know that you want to do something that checks to see if a printer is online, you know, I'm going to send this command and I'm going to get back from that command, I'm going to get back 1 byte of data that either tells me yes or no. Now, how the printer itself responds to it is different for each printer or for each device driver, but the application program just needs to know one way of checking if a printer is online. Now, then you make manufacturers develop these device drivers. The device driver has to implement the full API for that type of device. Then applications programs call the functions, not knowing and not caring how they're implemented. Device drivers are different for each hardware device, but they respond to the same function calls. So you might have an HP laser printer, and you might have an Epson inkjet printer, and they work completely differently on the inside, but your application program deals with them the same way. Okay, now let's move on to file management. Here's another thing that operating systems do. Operating systems are responsible for organizing the data that's stored on disk drives via a file management system. There could be an awful lot of stuff stored on your disk drive, and you need to be able to get to it. Now, we're used to getting to it with, let's say if you're using a Windows system, a letter for the drive, C:, and then a series of folders or directories, /users/ingracia/ GOA/unit2. And you've used these sorts of things on your Windows systems. You've used different folders on your Macs. You've gotten to files that you might have stored on your phones. When you take a picture, the camera on your phone stores it somewhere. Well, what does a file management system need to do? It has to include naming conventions for files. It has to include some sort of hierarchical method for organizing files. These are usually called folders or directories. And then, just like with device drivers, it has to have an application programming interface, an API, for opening, reading from, writing to, closing, creating, deleting files, and for defining and enforcing file permissions. So all of this is provided differently by different operating systems. The file permission systems on a Mac are completely different than the way file permissions are handled on a Windows system, which is different than the way they're handled on an Android phone, and so on. But something has to be in there to take care of these functions so that the applications programs can just say, I want to open this file, and all of a sudden they get the data from the file. And the last thing we'll talk about in system software with operating systems is a user interface. Now, we're used to talking about user interfaces with applications programs. Your camera has a user interface where you push a button and it clicks the shutter. And you've got another place where maybe you will zoom in or zoom out so that you get a close-up or you get a faraway shot. Or there'll be a little menu that you can push to turn the flash on or off. Application systems have a user interface, but an operating system has to support a user interface that lets you launch programs. How does the application program start? Well, you know that on a Windows system, on a Windows 7, you either double-click an icon that's on your desktop, or you go to the Start menu, or you right-click something in a file list, and so on. And you execute things differently on an iPhone, and so on. So an operating system has to provide an interface for end users to access files and run programs and access peripherals. Think about adding a new printer to your device. That's something that the operating system has to be able to take care of for you. Now, most modern operating systems provide a graphical user interface, a GUI. You've got your desktop that you see on your Mac. You've got the screen that you see on your iPhone or on your Android phone. But it's possible to provide only a text-based command line user interface. And it used to be that that's all that operating systems provided. Ask your parents sometime if they remember DOS, D-O-S, the digital operating system. This is what made Bill Gates a billionaire, by the way, in the late 70s, the early 80s. The legend is that he wrote the software. He was a brilliant computer programmer. He wrote the software for this operating system while on a plane with IBM to go pitch something about the new IBM PC that was going to be debuted. And all of you know from your last unit in 1981. And he wrote this and he provided it to IBM, and instead of selling it to IBM, he licensed it to IBM so he'd get money for every single computer that was ever sold for the rest of eternity that used DOS and then its successors, Windows. Brilliant man, brilliant business person as well. But ask your parents about DOS. There was no graphical user interface. You ran programs by typing in the name and hitting enter. You saw what was in a file folder by typing dir for directory, and it would list them. And it would, if it scrolled off the screen, too bad, you couldn't scroll back. So if you had more than 25 files, you wouldn't see them all, and so on. So now that you've watched all of these videos, Make sure you check to see what to do next. You're going to be going in and talking about them in the discussion database and working on your assignments. If you need to, come back and look at the appropriate video, post questions. I'll be lurking on the discussion board, seeing what sort of things you come up with. Answer each other, but if it looks like you're stuck, I'll dive in. Okay, happy computing.